Bill Federer is my guest. And Bill, this week on the radio, we had a fascinating conversation about why they're tearing down all these statues. And you brought up a very key word that I deal with in my book, Marxianity, and that word is deconstructionism. So let's talk about Marxist deconstructionism. Why are they tearing down all these statues? And then we're going to talk about why this is really a trap for the Democrats, if, of course, the media would point it out, which they won't. And so we'll get into showing the hypocrisy of them wanting to take down the statues of Confederate people or of people tied to slavery. I mean, we are a nation of people that have feet of clay, and we've done good, we've done bad, but in many regards we have seen the error of our ways. And of course, this nation practiced slavery shorter than many nations around the world. And of course, it was the Republican Party that ended slavery and passed the civil rights. But why are the Democrats so key on tearing down the statues, and particularly statues of guys like Robert E. Lee?
Well, it's interesting. I was reading where the first emperor of China, the United China, after the Warring States period, it's around 221 BC, and his name was Qin Shi Huangdi, and he had conquered these other warring states and decided to rule them. Well, they began to criticize him, saying that he was doing things differently than they had been done in the past. And he got tired of being compared to how it was done in the past. So he ordered all historical records destroyed. And wanted them burned, and his counselor was named Li Si, and he said, I, your servant, propose that all historical records other than those of Quin's be destroyed. If anyone under heaven has copies of the classics of history, they shall be delivered for burning. And if the family's caught, they'll be sent to build the Great Wall of China and all this kind of stuff. And they would not have survived had the classics of history in China been buried with a previous emperor in his tomb. Otherwise, we wouldn't have them. But this was this concept that you have to destroy the memory of the past before you can do something new. It's sort of gene therapy for a culture. Take out the old DNA, the old identity, and you insert a new. And this is actually a sales technique. If I was a toothpaste salesman, the first thing I do is say negative things about the toothpaste you're currently using. You're still using that old stuff? Don't you know it'll eat the enamel off your teeth? You're like, ooh, you're repulsed by it. Now I have you in a neutral position. You're open-minded. What are all the toothpastes out there? Then I give you my pitch for this brand new tartar-controlled breath freshener stuff. And so that's what they do. They go into the classrooms and they tell the kids negative things about the founding fathers. They took land from Indians, sold people into slavery, and ooh, the students are repulsed by them. Now you got the kids in a neutral. They're open-minded. What are all the belief systems out there? Then you give them your pitch for socialism or LGBT or Islam. And so it's sort of a drive neutral reverse. This happened in Europe with the French Revolution. They destroyed all of the previous history in France. They turned churches into temples of reason. They tore down statues of good King Henry IV. They dug up the bones of Saint Genevieve, who got Paris to fast and pray when Attila the Hun was scourging Europe. They didn't even want done in the year of the Lord, so they made 1792 the new year one. They didn't want a 7-day week with a Sabbath rest because it went back to the Bible, so they came up with a 10-day week. They called it a decade week. Each day had 10 hours. Each hour had 100 minutes. Each minute had 100 seconds. They said that 10 was the number of man, 10 fingers and 10 toes, so they made every measurement in France divisible by 10. They called it the metric system. Maybe that's why I never really liked the metric system. But it was this idea that they wanted to de-Christianize. They wanted to destroy the past so they could go into their brand new equalite, liberté, and fraternité. Fraternity was their word for socialism. We see this in other different areas. Whenever Islam comes into a country, they destroy the churches and the artwork and the graves and the museum and the memory of the past. And so this is what the socialist concept is they want to destroy the past so they can bring introduce their new socialist, communist type future.
And this is deconstructionism.
Correct.
And this goes very much along with the idea of dialectical materialism. Now, I don't want to go too deep into it here and have your eyes roll back in your head. I deal with it in my book, Marxianity, at marxianity.com. I deal with it in the 8.5-hour documovie Siege, where you can watch 1 hour for free at siegethemovie.com. But this fits with the idea of dialectical materialism of Karl Marx, dialectical. We've already talked about that tonight, haven't we? The Hegelian dialectic process, putting opposites against each other. Socialism versus capitalism. Police versus no police. Law and order versus anarchy. I mean, we could just keep going down the line doing this, can't we? Islam versus the Judeo-Christian worldview. Communism versus the Judeo-Christian worldview. All opposites competing and fighting, right? To get people to compromise. Well, we don't want our cities burned and looted. We want peace. We want things to have a normalcy to it. So we will compromise. And the ball keeps being moved down the field. Always the people who believe in God and absolute truth and a constitutional republic are always the one losing because they're ceding ground and compromise and dialogue, hopefully to go back to some normalcy. It's what the former KGB officer Yuri Bezmenov, who I talk about in this documentary Siege and play clips from him, at siegethemovie.com, he says you have to bring the steps of revolution. The former communist USSR KGB officer Yuri Bezmenov said chaos, right? First you demoralize, destabilize, chaos, and the new norm. Demoralize, take away absolute truth. Demoralize, destabilize, taking away absolute truth, right and wrong. That demoralizing creates the destabilization, which leads to the chaos. Well, we're seeing that today, right? After many decades of this process. Demoralize, destabilize, chaos, now the new norm. What's the new norm? Whatever they negotiate. But they had to have an opposite Hegelian dialectic process, known as, again, part of the Marxist strategy of dialectical materialism. There's no absolute truth, only the material world. Everything is always evolving and changing. So you start attacking the culture, the morality of the culture, the values of the culture. And once you change the values of the culture in their schools, after a few decades, guess what the young people want? Their values have changed. Now they want a government that matches their values. Notice they didn't really have to go after the foundation of the country, our constitutional republic, first. They first had a culture war, or as Herbert Marcuse at the Frankfurt School said, that the old way of revolution is old-fashioned, meaning guns and bullets. The new way of revolution is an attacking of the existing morality of the culture. Creation, God, morality, right, wrong, marriage, economics. Go after the morality of the culture in all areas: law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, education, religion. Once you've changed their values, they will deliberately turn around and do what they're doing now. After many decades, we've changed the values of enough Americans. Now they're saying, we want a different kind of government. We want a revolution and another kind of government. But to do that, you have to deconstruct the history, the tradition, the culture, the values, by pitting opposites, creating conflict, and then change their values. Now they say we want a new foundation. That's, in a simple term, dialectical materialism of Karl Marx, which is part of deconstructionism. Would you comment on that, Bill?
Sure. One quick quote from Arthur Schlesinger Jr. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian on John F. Kennedy's staff. And the quote is, "History is to the nation what memory is to the individual." So if you can imagine an individual who has lost their memory, maybe they have Alzheimer's, they forgot who they are, they forgot who you are, you can take anything away from them. We sort of have national Alzheimer's. Here we are, the freest country that planet Earth has ever seen, with more opportunity, yet we forgot how we got here. And as a result, we're just letting our freedoms being taken away. So the idea of take away the memory of these kids of what the uniqueness of America is.
They're now calling for tearing down statues. Robert E. Lee. Tell us quickly, as brief as you can, about Robert E. Lee, because he's an interesting individual, but he also is not what they're making him out to be at the later part of his life, correct?
Oh, right. He went to West Point. He was one of the heroes of the Mexican-American War, and then afterwards he actually helped save the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River was changing its course and actually leaving all kinds of land where St. Louis would have been a couple miles from the riverfront, but he puts in these long, like stone piles into the river that controls the flow and the course of the Mississippi River. Anyway, he is so well respected. He's married to the daughter of George Washington's adopted son. And but he's so respected, Lincoln actually asked him to lead the Union Army. He prayed about it all night and said he couldn't raise arms against his country. Well, back then, Virginia was his country. Everybody thought of the states. And it would be like, asking you or somebody to go into your hometown and kill your high school classmates. It's like, I just couldn't do that, right? And so, but as far as Lee goes, he was against slavery. He just saw this as an invasion of the North. Really, for the first year and a half of the war, the main issue was states' rights.
Right.
It wasn't until Lincoln did a brilliant political move called seizing the moral high ground, where he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which changed the perception of the war to ending slavery. Why is this very important? Because Britain was just about ready to recognize the Confederacy. The South was trading cotton for guns. And once the war was changed to fighting slavery, Britain said, hands off. We just got done with William Wilberforce and John Newton getting rid of slavery. We don't want to be seen supporting slavery. So it was a brilliant political maneuver on Lincoln's part to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. But nevertheless, Lee, from his point of view, perceived it as the federal government getting too powerful. And now he did take care of, when his father-in-law died, the estate was bankrupt, which is now Arlington Cemetery. It used to be the farm of his father-in-law. And he ended up getting the books back together, getting it into the good financial position, but then he freed the slaves. He was able to free all the slaves. And then later, when they confiscated his land, they turned it into Arlington Cemetery. The most important thing for him was after the war, he had some of the Confederate officers come to him and want to do a guerrilla warfare. And he said, no, the war's over. This thing, we don't want to drag this thing on for generations. And then he insisted on bringing racial healing. So a famous story at Richmond, Virginia, Episcopal Church, they were having a communion service, and a black man comes in, kneels down at the altar for communion, and the white people in the church sort of gasp, and Robert E. Lee stands up, walks to the front, kneels down next to him and receives communion, and then all the rest of the church go up and do that. And we see that his last effort was to bring healing after the Civil War. And, each one of us have good sides and bad sides. And so to try to throw somebody out for one or the other is really not being fair. We need to say the last thing he did in his life was to work toward racial healing. That was what he should be remembered for.
And so they should be tearing down his statue. Now, if they want to get rid of everything, the Democrats, and Pelosi's calling for tearing down all the Confederate statues, well, the Democrat Party was the party of slavery, the Jim Crow, starting the KK. Hillary Clinton, it's documented. Newsweek, that's not a right-wing publication. Newsweek, Hillary Clinton's link to former KKK leader Robert Byrd surfaces again after Charlottesville. She's on video commemorating after he died, calling him her great friend and mentor. She also received the Margaret Sanger Award. Margaret Sanger worked with a Nazi doctor. She was into eugenics. She called people of color weeds that need to be eradicated, and yet she said, I am really in awe of her. Received the Margaret Sanger Award. Margaret Sanger bragged about speaking to a women's auxiliary of the KKK. So what about her friend, though, Robert Byrd? Well, he's got many, many buildings in West Virginia named after him. I went through all the list of buildings named after him, and it fills 2 pages. So why aren't those buildings coming down? If you're going to tear down the Confederate statues, then we need to bring down Planned Parenthood, started by Margaret Sanger. We need to bring down the Democrat Party. We need to bring down every building named after Robert Byrd. How about getting rid of every mosque? Because quickly, in about 60 seconds, Bill, weren't the Muslims involved in the slave trade? Shouldn't we be bringing thus down every mosque in America if we're getting rid of anything related to slavery or racism in America?
Right. The Spaniards first came over and enslaved natives, and a Catholic priest, Bartolomé de las Casas, spends his whole life getting the King of Spain to outlaw the enslavement of Native Americans. He's successful, but then the greedy people say, where can we get more slaves? And they said Africa. So they went to the Muslim slave markets, Timbuktu, Khartoum, Sudan, all the Zanzibar coast, Tanzania. These were all Arab-Muslim slave trading posts. And even David Livingstone, the missionary to the Congo in the 1800s, writes about going through the jungle, stumbling across a path of 1,000 Africans shackled together, being forced to march 500 miles to the coast to be sold into Muslim slavery. He says, if anything more important than discovering the source of the Nile River would be to get rid of this monster that hangs over Africa of the Muslim Arab slave trade.
Well, thanks so much for being with us. Till next time, I'm Brannon Howse. Take care.